In the summer of 1873, beneath the scorching Arizona sun and swirling dust of Copper Falls, a gruff cattle rancher named Ezra Kane paid $50 to free a young black woman from her drunken father's gambling debt, believing her to be deaf and unable to speak. The transaction took place in Murphy's saloon on a Tuesday afternoon, witnessed by three other men who watched the exchange with varying degrees of disgust and curiosity as Thomas Wright stumbled away with his coins, leaving behind his 19-year-old daughter without a backward glance. Sarah stood silently beside the poker table, her dark eyes taking in everything while revealing nothing, her hands folded carefully in front of her worn cotton dress as she waited to discover what this weathered stranger with kind eyes and calloused hands intended to do with her. The other patrons assumed they were witnessing either an act of charity or the beginning of another tragedy, but none of them could have imagined that the young woman they pitied possessed a gift so extraordinary and dangerous that it would soon draw desperate men from across the territory to seek her out. What they could not know, what even Ezra Kane could not know as he gently gestured for her to follow him out into the blazing afternoon heat, was that Sarah heard every cruel thought, every whispered judgment, and every dark intention that passed through their minds as clearly as if they had shouted the words aloud. She had learned long ago that survival meant keeping her secrets buried deep, but some truths have a way of surfacing when the stakes become a matter of life and death. The rope bit into Sarah's wrists as Vincent Cray pressed the gun barrel against Ezra's temple. Blood trickled from where the old rancher had struck the mine wall when they'd dragged him inside. The lantern light threw wild shadows across the rock walls. "Prove it," Cray snarled. His voice echoed in the narrow shaft. "Tell me what I'm thinking, or the old man dies." Sarah's chest rose and fell in the flickering light. Her eyes moved between the three men surrounding them. The other two shifted nervously behind Cray, their thoughts loud as thunder in her mind. "You're thinking about your daughter." Her voice cut through the underground silence, clear and strong. "Emma." "How?" "She died of fever last winter while you were chasing gold in the northern claims." Cray's hand trembled. The gun wavered against Ezra's skull. "You think if I can read minds, I can tell you something about her final moments. Whether she forgave you for leaving her with strangers while you dug holes in frozen ground." The prospector's breathing turned ragged. His companions exchanged glances in the lamplight. "You're also thinking that even if I give you peace about Emma, you'll still have to kill us both." Sarah stepped closer despite her bound hands. "Because you can't let word spread about what you've done here tonight." Cray's face crumpled. The weight of truth hung in the stale air like dust. Sarah heard it all. The guilt eating him alive. The desperate hope that his daughter's spirit might somehow reach across death to offer forgiveness, and underneath, the cold calculation that his shame demanded their silence forever. The mineshaft waited. Sarah closed her eyes and made her choice. 4 days earlier, Ezra Kane had ridden into Copper Falls under a sun that baked the earth white. The town squatted in the valley like a collection of weathered bones. Dust devils spun between the buildings. Murphy's saloon offered the only shade worth finding. Ezra pushed through the bat-wing doors and let his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The smell of stale whiskey and unwashed men filled his nostrils. A poker game occupied the corner table. 5 men hunched over cards and coins. Ezra recognized the type: drifters and claim jumpers and men whose luck had run dry in the diggings. He ordered whiskey and minded his own business until the shouting started. Thomas Wright swayed in his chair, drunk and desperate. His dark skin gleamed with sweat in the lamplight. The coins before him had dwindled to nothing. "I got something else," Wright slurred. "Something worth more than money." The other players leaned back. This was how bad debts turned dangerous. "My girl's outside, 19 years old. Can't hear nothing, can't say nothing, but she's got hands that can work and she won't cause no trouble." Ezra's whiskey turned to ash in his mouth. He'd seen this before. Men selling what wasn't theirs to sell. $50, Wright continued. "Take her off my hands and we're square." The saloon had gone quiet. Even the bartender had stopped wiping glasses. Ezra stood slowly. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he walked to the table. The other players watched him approach like vultures eyeing carrion. I'll take that bet. He dropped two $20 gold pieces and a 10 on the felt. The coins rang against each other. Wright blinked up at him through bleary eyes. You sure about this, mister? Girl's got problems. Been touched in the head since she was small. The debt's paid. Ezra's voice carried the weight of finality. Where is she? They found Sarah sitting on the saloon's front steps. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen too many washings. Her hands rested folded in her lap. When the men appeared, she looked up with eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Wright gestured vaguely in her direction. There she is. Sarah. Can't hear a word you say to her, but she understands pointing and such. Ezra studied the young woman's face. Intelligence lived behind those dark eyes. Something else, too. Wariness earned through hard experience. He extended his hand toward her. Palm up. An invitation, not a command. Sarah hesitated. Her gaze moved, from his face to his outstretched hand and back again. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she stood and placed her fingers lightly on his palm. Wright pocketed his coins and stumbled away without another word. The transaction was complete. Ezra led Sarah to his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Della. He helped her mount behind him, her hands barely touching his shoulders for balance. They rode out of Copper Falls in silence, dust rising from Della's hooves. The ranch sat in a valley 20 miles from town. A modest cabin, a barn that needed repairs, and corrals that held more memories than cattle these days. Ezra had built it with his own hands 15 years ago, back when he'd believed in futures that stretched longer than the next sunrise. He showed Sarah to the small room that had once belonged to his daughter. The bed was narrow but clean. A window faced east toward the mountains. You can stay here, he said, then remembered she supposedly couldn't hear him. Instead, he gestured around the room and nodded. She nodded back. Over the following days, Sarah proved herself in ways that surprised him. She organized his chaotic cabin with swift efficiency, mended his shirts with neat, precise stitches, prepared meals from his meager supplies that tasted better than anything he'd managed in months. But small things troubled him. The way she turned toward sounds she shouldn't be able to hear. How she always seemed to know when someone was approaching the ranch long before they came into view. The intelligence that shone in her eyes when she thought he wasn't watching. On the fourth morning, they rode into town for supplies. Sarah sat behind him on Della, her presence light as shadow. The sun climbed toward noon as they approached Copper Falls. Main Street bustled with the usual collection of miners, merchants, and men whose business was their own. Ezra tied Della to the hitching post outside Henderson's general store. That was when it happened. Sarah suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the store's front wall. Her grip was strong, urgent. Ezra stumbled backward, just as a support beam crashed down from the roof overhang, landing exactly where he'd been standing. Splinters of wood scattered across the boardwalk. Dust rose in clouds around the fallen timber. A crowd gathered quickly. Voices rose in excitement and concern. How had she known? How could a deaf girl have heard the beam cracking when none of them had noticed? Ezra looked at Sarah. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes held steady on his. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that their quiet life at the ranch was about to become complicated. Vincent Cray emerged from the crowd, a lean man with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. He stared at Sarah with the intensity of a man who'd found something he'd been searching for. That was quite something, Cray said to Ezra. Your girl's got lucky instincts. The word instincts carried weight, implications. Lucky, Ezra agreed carefully, but Cray's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Seems like more than luck to me. Mind if I ask her name? Sarah stepped closer to Ezra. Her movement was subtle, but clear. Protection sought and offered. Sarah, Ezra replied. And she can't hear you asking. Course not. Cray tipped his hat. Just curious about the girl who saved your life is all. Word gets around in a town this size. He walked away, but his interest lingered like smoke in still air. Ezra finished his business at the store quickly. The ride home felt longer than usual. Sarah's hands rested lightly on his back, but he could feel tension in her posture. The ranch appeared ahead, sturdy and familiar against the afternoon sky, but as they approached the cabin, Ezra realized that safety was something that could be lost as easily as it was found. Behind them, dust clouds marked other riders on the distant road, men with questions and needs and hungers that wouldn't be satisfied with simple answers. Sarah had heard them coming long before they appeared on the horizon. Her gift, whatever it was, had kept them alive today. Tomorrow might demand a different kind of survival altogether. The slate board lay between them on the kitchen table like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ezra had found it in his daughter's old room, covered in dust and memories. He wiped it, clean with careful hands. Sarah watched him write the first letter. A. Simple and stark in white chalk against dark stone. She took the chalk from his fingers. Her hand moved with surprising confidence, forming letters that matched his own. Then words. Then sentences that revealed a mind sharp as winter wind. My name is Sarah Wright. I am 19 years old. Thank you for bringing me here. Ezra read the words twice. The handwriting was neat, controlled. Nothing like what he'd expected from someone supposedly touched in the head. He wrote back. Can you read well? Yes. My mother taught me before she died. I learned more by watching and listening. The word listening hung between them like smoke. Days passed in this careful dance of chalk and silence. Sarah learned his routines with uncanny speed. She knew when he would wake, when he would tend the horses, when he would sit on the porch watching the sun die behind the mountains. She mended his clothes with stitches so small they seemed to disappear into the fabric. Cooked meals that made his empty cabin smell like home again. Organized his scattered belongings with an efficiency that spoke of intelligence long hidden. But questions multiplied like storm clouds on the horizon. Sarah always turned when riders approached, long before their horses came into view. She flinched at sounds that shouldn't reach deaf ears. Her eyes tracked conversations across rooms with the focus of someone following every word. Ezra began to test her without meaning to. He would drop things behind her back, call her name from the next room, whisper comments under his breath. Each time, something in her posture shifted, a tension that suggested awareness she shouldn't possess. The truth came during the storm. Thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire. Lightning split the sky in jagged wounds. Ezra had ridden out to check on the cattle before the weather turned violent, but Della had spooked at a rattlesnake and thrown him hard against the rocks. He made it home barely conscious, rain soaking through his clothes. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. His left arm hung useless at his side. The cabin was dark when he stumbled through the door. Sarah should have been asleep in her room, unaware of his return. Instead, she was waiting. Hold on, Mr. Kane. Her voice cut through the storm's roar, clear and strong and impossible. You're going to be all right. She helped him to his bed with hands that knew exactly how to support his weight without causing more pain. Lit the lamp with matches she'd already prepared. Examined his injuries with the confidence of someone who'd tended wounds before. This is going to hurt, she said softly, cleaning the head wound with whiskey and steady fingers. Ezra watched her work through half-closed eyes. The careful way she checked his arm for breaks. How she knew to elevate his feet when dizziness threatened to pull him under. The gentle competence in her movements. She thought he was unconscious when she spoke again. My mother used to say that pain was just the body's way of reminding us we're still alive. That surviving meant learning, to carry hurt without letting it define you. Her voice carried weight beyond her years. Stories untold and burdens borne in silence. I've been carrying hurt so long I sometimes forget what it feels like to put it down. But these past days with you, I've remembered what kindness looks like. What it means to be safe. Ezra lay still, breathing shallow. Understanding crashed over him like cold water. Sarah could hear. Had always been able to hear. When he woke the next morning, she was back to her silent gestures and careful distance. The slate board waited on the table with a simple message written in her neat hand. "How are you feeling?" But their eyes met across the kitchen, and something had changed. The pretense felt thinner now, worn down by truth accidentally revealed. Ezra picked up the chalk, wrote carefully, "I heard you last night." Sarah's hand froze halfway to the board, color drained from her face. He continued writing. "You don't have to pretend anymore, not with me." She sat down heavily in the wooden chair. Her shoulders shook once, then went still. When she looked up, tears tracked down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. "I can hear more than just sounds." The words came out like a confession. "I hear thoughts, feelings, the things people don't say out loud." Ezra set down the chalk. Processing this revelation felt like trying to hold water in cupped hands. "Since when?" "Since I was 8 years old. Maybe before that, but 8 was when I understood what was happening to me." She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains. "My mother said it was a gift from God. My father called it a curse. Most folks would call it something worse." "What do you call it?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Survival." She told him about learning to hide the ability, how she'd discovered the people feared what they couldn't understand, that being thought deaf and simple was safer than being known as someone who could reach into minds and pull out secrets. "The thoughts never stop," she said. "It's like standing in a crowd where everyone's talking at once except they don't know they're talking. Anger and fear and loneliness and wants they're ashamed to admit. It gets overwhelming." Ezra thought about his own thoughts over the past weeks. The memories of his dead wife and daughter, his guilt over surviving when they hadn't, the growing protectiveness he felt toward Sarah that reminded him of fatherhood he'd thought he'd lost forever. "What do you hear from me?" She turned from the window. Her smile was sad and gentle. "Mostly you think about people you loved and lost. A woman named Mary, a little girl named Beth. You blame yourself for things that weren't your fault." Their names hit him like physical blows. He hadn't spoken them aloud in 2 years. "You also think about keeping me safe," Sarah continued. "About giving me the life your daughter never got to finish. That's not guilt or charity, Mr. Kane. That's love. And I hear it every time you look at me." Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm moving on toward other valleys. In its wake came a stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Ezra stood slowly, his injuries protesting the movement. He crossed to where Sarah waited by the window and placed his weathered hands on her shoulders. "Then you know I won't let anyone hurt you." "I know. And you know this is your home now. Not because I bought some debt, but because family isn't always about blood." Her smile broke like sunrise after the longest night. "I know that too." They stood together in the quiet cabin, listening to the rain gentle against the roof. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and new growth. Inside, 2 broken people had found something worth protecting in each other. But peace in the territory was always temporary. Hoofbeats sounded in the distance, approaching fast through the settling storm. Sarah's head turned toward the sound, her expression shifting from contentment to concern. "How many?" Ezra asked. 3 riders, and they're not bringing good news." She moved to the window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. Her shoulders tensed as she focused on thoughts only she could hear. "It's Vincent Cray. He's got the sheriff with him, and Reverend Matthews." Ezra reached for his rifle, checking the load out of habit. "What do they want?" Sarah's face went pale in the lamplight. "They want to test me, to see if the stories about what happened in town are true." The riders were close now, their horses' hooves drumming against the muddy ground. Sarah stepped back from the window and looked at Ezra with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. "They're not going to let this go. Word's spreading about the girl who saved your life. People are starting to ask questions we can't answer." Ezra moved to stand beside her, rifle held loose but ready. "Then we'd better figure out some answers." The knock on his door came hard and official. Through the wood, Sheriff Bolivar's voice carried the weight of authority and reluctance in equal measure. Ezra Kane, we need to talk. Sheriff Bolivar removed his hat as he stepped inside. Water dripped from his coat onto the cabin floor. Behind him, Reverend Matthews clutched his Bible like a shield. Vincent Cray lingered in the doorway, his eyes fixed on Sarah with hungry intensity. Evening, Ezra. Bolivar's voice carried reluctance. Sorry to disturb you folks during the storm. Ezra kept his rifle lowered but visible. What brings you out in weather like this? Questions. Matthews spoke before the sheriff could answer. About unnatural happenings. About gifts that don't come from the Lord. Sarah stood motionless beside the window. Her breathing had gone, shallow, but her expression remained calm. Only Ezra could see the tension in her shoulders. The girl saved your life today, Cray said. Pulled you away from that beam like she knew it was going to fall. Now how does a deaf girl hear wood cracking when the rest of us missed it entirely? Bolivar shifted uncomfortably. Vincent here thinks maybe she ain't as deaf as folks believe. Maybe she's something else entirely, Matthews added. His knuckles were white around the Bible's leather binding. Ezra felt Sarah's fear like heat from a forge. She was listening to their thoughts, hearing accusations and suspicions that hadn't yet reached their lips. Sarah's got good instincts, Ezra said carefully. Some folks are naturally observant. Cray laughed without humor. Instincts don't tell you when a support beam's about to give way. That takes something else, something unnatural. The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Matthews stepped forward. The Bible speaks of those who consort with familiar spirits, who claim knowledge they couldn't possess through righteous means. You calling my ward a witch, Reverend? I'm calling her dangerous. Matthew's voice rose with conviction. There's been talk around town, people remembering strange things, how she always seemed to know when storms were coming, how animals acted different around her, how she could find lost items that shouldn't have been findable. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, the weight of years spent hiding pressed down on her like stone. Bolivar cleared his throat. Now, I'm not saying I believe in such things, but territorial authorities are asking questions about reports of witchcraft in Copper Falls. They want answers. What kind of answers? Ezra asked. Cray smiled like a predator scenting blood. The kind that prove what she can really do. A test. Test? Hide something where she can't see it. Have her find it. If she's just a normal girl with good instincts, she'll fail. If she's something else, well, then we'll know for certain. The cabin fell silent except for rain against the windows. Sarah turned from her place by the glass, meeting Ezra's eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding. Resolve. She can't hear you talking, Ezra said finally. How would she understand what you want? You can explain it to her, Matthews replied, through gestures or writing or however you two communicate. And if she refuses? Cray's expression hardened. Then we'll know she's got something to hide. Bolivar looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Ezra, I've known you for 15 years. You're a good man. But if there's something unnatural going on here, it's my job to investigate. Sarah stepped forward. Her movement drew all eyes to her face. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but clear. I'll take your test. The three men stared in shock. Matthews actually stumbled backward. She can talk, Bolivar whispered. She can hear, Cray added with grim satisfaction. Sarah nodded slowly. I can hear. I've always been able to hear. I pretended otherwise because it was safer. Safer from what? Matthews demanded. From men like you. Men who fear what they don't understand. She walked to the center of the room, facing them with dignity that made her seem older than her 19 years. You want to test me? Fine. But when I pass your test, when I prove what you already suspect, what then? Do you drive me out of town? Lock me away? Burn me like they did women who could read and write? Cray leaned forward eagerly. That depends on what else you can do besides hear. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I can hear thoughts. The things people think but don't say aloud. Right now you're thinking about your daughter Emma, how she died while you were prospecting in the northern claims, how you've been carrying guilt like a stone in your chest ever since. Cray's face went white. His hands shook. You're also thinking that if I can really read minds, maybe I can tell you things about Emma's final days. Whether she forgave you for leaving her with strangers while you chased dreams in frozen ground. Matthews raised his Bible like a weapon. Blasphemy. No mortal soul can read the thoughts of others. Then how did I know about Emma? Sarah asked. How do I know that you, Reverend Matthews, have been stealing money from the church collection to pay gambling debts? Or that Sheriff Bolivar has been taking bribes from the Thompson gang to look the other way when their cattle disappear? Both. Men recoiled as if struck. The truth hit them like lightning in a clear sky. Bolivar's hand moved toward his gun. Now see here. I see everything, Sarah continued. I hear the darkness you hide from each other, the shame and fear and desperate wants that eat at you in the quiet hours. That's my gift. That's my curse. Ezra moved to stand beside her. His presence was solid, protective. Now you know. The question is what you plan to do about it. Cray found his voice first. She could help people. Find lost things. Locate missing persons. Tell us where the Washburn gold is hidden. She could expose corruption, Matthews added nervously. Destroy reputations. Turn neighbor against neighbor with private thoughts made public. Bolivar holstered his gun, but his expression remained troubled. She could be dangerous in the wrong hands, or helpful in the right ones, Cray pressed. Think about what she could accomplish, the mysteries she could solve. Sarah felt the shift in their thinking, fear giving way to greed, suspicion transforming into hunger for power. She'd seen it before, this moment when people stopped seeing her as human and started viewing her as a tool to be used. I won't be anyone's weapon, she said firmly. That might not be your choice, Cray replied. Word's going to spread about what you can do. People will come looking for answers. Some of them won't ask politely. Matthews nodded reluctantly. The girl's right about one thing. She's dangerous, but she might be too valuable to destroy. Bolivar adjusted his badge, thinking hard. Territorial authorities will want to examine her, determine if she's a threat to public safety. Or a resource to be exploited, Ezra said grimly. The cabin fell, quiet again. Outside, the storm was passing, but inside, a different kind of weather was building. Sarah could hear their thoughts churning like water before a flash flood. Cray was already planning how to use her abilities for his own purposes. Matthews feared exposure of his secrets, but craved the power her gift might bring. Bolivar worried about his job, his reputation, his own hidden shames. None of them were thinking about her safety or well-being. They saw opportunity where she saw nightmare. We need time to think about this, Bolivar said finally. Figure out the best way to handle the situation. Time for what? Ezra asked. To decide what to do with her, Cray answered. Can't have someone with her abilities running around unsupervised. Too much potential for trouble. Sarah stepped closer to Ezra. His hand found her shoulder, steady and reassuring. She's not going anywhere, Ezra said. This is her home. That's not your decision anymore, Matthews replied. This is bigger than one man's charity. Cray smiled without warmth. We'll be back tomorrow, with more people, folks who need to see what she can do for themselves. The three men filed out into the dying storm. Their horses disappeared into the darkness, but their intentions lingered like poison in still water. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it. Her hands trembled now that the confrontation was over. They're not going to let this go, she whispered. Ezra checked the rifle's load, his movements deliberate. Then we'd better be ready for whatever comes next. Through the window, lightning flickered on the horizon. The storm was moving on, but Sarah could hear other tempests approaching. Men with desperate needs and dangerous plans. People who would see her gift as salvation or damnation, but never as simply human. She pressed her ear to the door and listened. To the night. Somewhere in the darkness, Vincent Cray was already gathering allies. Men who believed they deserved answers to questions that had haunted them for years. Tomorrow would bring visitors. Tomorrow would bring choices that couldn't be undone. Tonight she and Ezra would prepare for war. Sarah looked into Vincent Cray's broken eyes and made her choice. The mine shaft waited in silence around them, heavy with the weight of desperate men and darker truths. She forgave you before she died. The words came out steady despite her bound hands. Emma loved you, Mr. Cray, even when fever took her, even when she called for you when you weren't there. Children forgive easier than grown folks do. Cray's gun hand shook. Tears cut tracks through the dust on his weathered face. But she also wanted something else from you. She wanted you to stop punishing yourself and find a way to live with love instead of guilt. The prospector's shoulders sagged. The weapon in his hand suddenly seemed too heavy to hold. Sarah heard the shift in his companion's thoughts. Greed, replacing grief. Plans forming in minds that had never cared about dead children or guilty fathers. The gold, Cray, one of them hissed. Ask her about the Washburn cash. But Cray wasn't listening anymore. His daughter's forgiveness had broken something loose inside him, and now he was falling apart like a dam in flood season. Sarah used the moment. She shifted her weight and kicked hard at the lantern beside her feet. Glass shattered against stone. Flames spread across spilled oil in wild patterns. They were planning to kill us both anyway, she told Cray as fire danced between them. I heard it in their thoughts. They never intended to let any of us leave this mine alive. The truth hit, like lightning in the sudden darkness. Cray spun toward his companions, understanding flooding his face. They'd used his grief to get what they wanted. His daughter's memory was just another tool in their hands. The betrayal finished what Sarah's compassion had started. Cray raised his gun toward the men who'd manipulated his pain for their own ends. In the chaos that followed, Sarah rolled toward Ezra's unconscious form. Her bound hands found the knife on his belt. The rope parted with desperate sawing motions. Voices echoed through the mine tunnels, shouts and accusations and the sound of running feet. The other men had scattered when Cray turned on them, but they'd be back with reinforcements. Sarah shook Ezra until his eyes opened. Blood had dried on his forehead, but consciousness returned to his gaze. Can you move? He nodded and struggled to sit up. The mine shaft spun around them like a child's top, but he forced himself upright. Which way out? Sarah closed her eyes and listened. Thoughts moved through the tunnels like echoes. Fear and greed and desperation bouncing off stone walls. North Tunnel. They're guarding the main entrance. They moved through darkness that seemed thick enough to touch. Sarah's gift guided them past unstable supports and hidden shafts that dropped into nothing. Behind them, lantern light flickered as their pursuers regrouped. The north tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Moonlight filtered down through cracks in the ceiling. And there, scattered across the rocky floor like fallen stars, lay the Washburn, gold, coins and nuggets and small bars that caught the pale light and threw it back in gleaming fragments. Enough wealth to buy half the territory. Enough to drive men to murder and madness. Ezra stared at the treasure that had claimed so many lives. All this for pieces of metal. It's not about the gold, Sarah said quietly. It's about what they think it can fix. The pain they think money can heal. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. Their pursuers had found the trail. Vincent Cray emerged first, his face haggard in the moonlight. The other men followed with weapons drawn, and eyes bright with gold fever. There it is, one of them breathed. The Washburn cache, just like the stories said. They moved toward the scattered treasure like men possessed. Sarah watched their thoughts turn ugly with anticipation. You did good, girl, Cray said to her. Let us right to it. But Sarah heard the lie underneath his gratitude. He still planned to kill them. The gold changed nothing except the size of the stakes. Mr. Cray, she said softly, your daughter wouldn't want this. Emma's forgiveness wasn't meant to lead you deeper into darkness. He paused with his hands full of coins. Emma's dead. This gold can't hurt her now. But it can hurt you. It already has. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He'd Spent so long chasing wealth to ease his guilt that he'd forgotten what Emma had actually wanted from him. Not riches or revenge or power over others. Just a father who could love himself enough to live with purpose instead of pain. The realization came too late. The ceiling cracked with a sound like thunder. Years of mining had weakened the supports. The weight of desperate men and darker purposes had finally found the breaking point. Stone rained down in chunks that shattered against the tunnel floor. Dust filled the air like smoke from some ancient fire. "The whole place is coming down," Ezra shouted over the rumble. Sarah grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a narrow passage she'd noticed earlier. It led upward toward cleaner air and starlight. Behind them, Cray made his choice. Instead of following them to safety, he knelt among the falling rocks and gathered gold in his arms. His companions did the same, their greed stronger than their survival instincts. "Leave it," Sarah called back to them. "It's not worth your lives." But they couldn't hear her over the sound of their own wanting. The passage was narrow and steep, but it led them out of the mine's death grip. They emerged onto a hillside under stars that seemed impossibly bright after the underground darkness. Behind them, the Copper Creek mine collapsed with a roar that shook the earth. Dust clouds rose like smoke signals against the night sky. Vincent Cray and his companions had chosen gold over life. The mountain had made that choice final. Sarah and Ezra stood in the clean air and listened to the settling stone. Somewhere beneath the rubble lay enough wealth to buy kingdoms. It would stay there now, buried with the men who'd valued it more than breath. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of their new home and watched the sun rise over different mountains. The farm sat in a valley 200 miles from Copper Falls, far enough from the past to build something new. Ezra had aged well in the clean air and honest work. His hair had gone completely gray, but his eyes held peace she'd never seen before. He'd found redemption in daily kindness and the simple grace of watching her grow into the woman she was meant to become. Sarah had learned to control her gift. She could choose when to listen to the thoughts around her and when to give people the privacy of their own minds. The ability was still there, still strong, but now it served love instead of survival. A wagon approached through the morning mist, a young couple with worry written across their faces. The woman kept looking over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. Sarah heard their thoughts before they spoke, fear and desperation, and hope that someone might offer sanctuary from whatever they were running from. She'd heard these thoughts before, in her own mind during those years of hiding, in Ezra's heart when he'd first taken her home, in every person who'd ever needed safety, more than they needed answers. "We're lost," the man called out when the wagon reached their fence. "Been traveling for days. Don't suppose you folks know the way to Sacramento?" Sarah smiled and opened the gate wider. "Why don't you rest here, tonight? It's a long road to California. You'll need supplies and a good meal before you continue." The woman's relief was so strong Sarah could taste it like sweet water after thirst. She climbed down from the wagon with grateful tears in her eyes. Later, after they'd shared supper and stories around the kitchen table, Sarah watched their guests settle into the barn for the night. Safe and warm and no longer running alone. Ezra joined her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cool air. "You heard what they were really running from?" Sarah nodded. Her husband used to beat her when he drank. They took their savings and left in the middle of the night. "You going to help them?" "Already am. Tomorrow I'll give them directions. To a town where the sheriff's honest and the preacher believes in fresh starts. There's a woman there who helps folks like them build new lives." Ezra sipped his coffee and smiled. "Emma would have liked you." "Your daughter? She always said the best way to heal old hurts was to prevent new ones. You do that every time you help someone who needs sanctuary." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to night sounds and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new travelers, new needs, new opportunities to turn pain into purpose. Sarah had finally found her place in the world, not as a weapon or a tool or a curiosity to be feared and exploited, but as a guardian of those who needed protection. a keeper of safe harbors in a world that could be cruel to anyone who seemed different. She'd learned to hear not just thoughts and fears, but hopes and dreams and the quiet strength that lived in people who chose kindness over cruelty. That was the real gift. Not reading minds, but reading hearts and responding with love. The farm would always welcome those who needed shelter. The door would always be open to anyone running from darkness toward light. In the morning, Sarah would teach the local children to read and write, using both spoken words and silent gestures to bridge the gap between her hidden world and theirs. She would tend her garden and help her neighbors and live quietly in the knowledge that some battles were won not with violence but with compassion. Vincent Cray had found his peace buried under stone and gold. Sarah had found hers in a life spent lifting others from the depths of their own despair. The difference between the two was the choice each had made about what truly mattered when everything else was stripped away. And that is all to the story. For now, please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story. There. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.